What if one moment in a crowded saloon could change two lives forever? The dust in Red Valley drifted like smoke when Jake Sullivan walked through the doors of the Broken Horseshoe. The evening sun hit his scarred face, carving shadows that made the room fall silent for half a heartbeat. Men who knew him shifted just enough to avoid trouble. Strangers sensed danger without understanding why. Jake had that effect on people. He wasn't looking for whiskey or company. At 42, he wanted nothing more than a quiet corner and a bottle that didn't burn like lamp fuel. His back ached from riding, his shoulder still stiff from a bullet he'd never bothered to dig out last winter. Life had carved him into a man who moved slow, talked less, and trusted no one. But the moment his boots touched the saloon floor, he saw her. Clara Morrison stood near the bar, pressed tight against it like someone trying to become invisible. Everything about her looked out of place. Her dress was worn from travel, but made of fine, store-bought fabric. Her auburn hair was pinned up with care, though strands had escaped from fighting the desert wind. Her eyes, green with flecks of gold, held a kind of fear that didn't belong in a place like this, and a kind of strength she didn't yet understand. Bill Hawkins saw her too, a heavy-set brute with a fake deputy badge and too much whiskey in his blood. Hawkins ruled small men with big mouths, and tonight he'd found himself new prey. "Come on now, sugar," Hawkins slurred, grabbing her arm. "A lady like you ought to be grateful for friendly company." Clara tried to pull away, polite even in terror. "Please, let me go, I'm just passing through." Skier, Hawkins's rat-faced sidekick, blocked her escape. "Ain't polite to refuse the law." "That badge," Clara said softly, "is as real as your manners." The saloon laughed. Hawkins didn't. He tightened his grip, making Clara wince. "You think you're too good for us? Some fine lady come to judge the rest of us?" Jake watched from the corner. He'd promised himself long ago never to interfere again. People got themselves into trouble. People could get themselves out. But something in Clara's eyes, fear mixed with defiance, cut through the walls he'd spent years building. Before he realized he'd moved, Jake stood. His chair scraped across the floor, slicing through the room's noise. Men turned. Drinks paused mid-air. Hawkins stiffened. The lady said no. Jake said calmly. Hawkins narrowed his eyes. "This ain't your problem, Sullivan." Jake walked forward with the slow, measured steps of a man who'd killed enough to know he didn't need to hurry. 5 men bothering one woman makes it my problem. Skier laughed nervously. "Odds ain't in your favor, Jake." Jake rested his hand near his Colt. "I've survived worse odds." The room went silent, thick with waiting. Hawkins yanked Clara closer. "You really want to die over some woman you don't know?" Clara flinched, but Jake didn't blink. "I want to finish my drink in peace. She wants to leave in peace." Seemed simple. Hawkins wasn't used to being told no. Pride burned in his eyes. Fear flickered too. Stories about Jake Sullivan traveled faster than stagecoaches. Men whispered about gunfights in New Mexico, raids in the Dakota Plains, ambushes he walked away from when better men did not. Finally, Hawkins shoved Clara aside. "This ain't over. You just signed your death paper." Jake steadied her before she fell. "Get your things," he said gently. "You got a place to stay?" Quote. "No," Clara whispered. "I was looking for a room." Jake exhaled, already regretting what he would say next. "Mrs. Perkins runs a boarding house. Tell her I sent you." Clara studied him, her breath shaky. "Why, help me." Jake shrugged. Didn't like the odds. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me. Just stay away from Hawkins." Outside, the sky bled orange as the sun dipped behind the desert hills. Clara walked toward Maple Street, her back straight even though her hands trembled. Jake watched until she disappeared. Something in his chest tightened, an old feeling he didn't want to name. He turned back toward the saloon, but the whiskey no longer called to him. Danger did. Hawkins and his men would come. Cowards always came in packs. Jake stepped outside again, scanning the street. The wind carried dry dust and a whisper of something darker. Clara Morrison had secrets. Trouble clung to her like shadow. And Jake, for the first time in years, cared enough to notice. That alone was dangerous. That alone could get him killed. But for reasons he couldn't understand yet, he didn't mind. The storm clouds gathered long before they touched the sky. Jake felt it that night when he made camp outside Red Valley. He sat by a small fire under the cottonwoods, his rifle across his knees, listening to the night sounds. Ever since he stepped between Clara and Hawkins, something inside him stayed alert, watching the darkness like an old instinct had come alive again. 3 days passed quietly. Too quietly. Clara kept to the boarding house, stepping outside only when she had to. Jake saw her from a distance sometimes, walking carefully with her travel bag, paying for bread at the bakery, sitting on the porch in the fading light. She looked calmer than the day he'd met her, but he could see the worry in her eyes every time someone walked near. On the third night she came to his camp. The moon shone bright enough to paint the desert silver. Jake poured coffee when he saw her small figure moving toward him. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said. "I couldn't sleep," Clara admitted, stepping into the firelight. "May I sit?" Jake nodded. She settled on the log across from him, the fire warming her tired face. They didn't speak at first. They didn't need to. The quiet was strangely comfortable. Finally, Jake asked, "You running from someone?" Clara hesitated, staring into the flames. "Yes. From a man who refuses to let me live my own life." Jake's jaw tightened. "Hawkins?" "No," she whispered. "Someone far worse." She told him then. About Samuel Morrison, her late husband's powerful brother who believed she was part of the estate to control, the lies he told, the threats he made. The way he tried to claim everything she owned, including her freedom. "I ran west because I thought he'd never follow," she said. "But Samuel has money, influence. He wants to own me, or ruin me." Jake sat back. "Is he the reason you came through Red Valley?" She nodded. "I needed a place to disappear, somewhere far from the world he controls." Jake stirred the fire. "You picked the wrong town. Hawkins will come for you again. Men like him don't forgive humiliation." Clara looked up, her eyes steady. "I wasn't safe anywhere else. I thought, maybe here I could breathe for a while." Jake didn't know what to say. He'd lived most of his adult life alone, moving from place to place so his ghosts never caught him. But something inside him understood her fear too well. They talked until the fire burned low. About running, about pain, about the parts of themselves they wished they could forget. When she finally stood to leave, Clara looked at him with a softness that made Jake feel exposed. "Thank you," she whispered, "for listening." Jake watched her walk away through the moonlit desert. Something in his chest shifted, sharp and dangerous. He knew then that whatever storm was coming, he wouldn't let her face it alone. The storm came at dawn. Hoofbeats thundered through the cottonwoods as Jake rolled out of his bedroll, drawing his gun. Riders circled his camp. He counted 9. Too many. Hawkins sat tall in the saddle, grinning through broken teeth. He had reinforcements this time. "Morning, Sullivan," Hawkins called. "Heard you been keeping the Morrison lady real close." Jake didn't move, didn't blink. "State your business." "We got news," Hawkins said. "Telegram came yesterday. That pretty lady you've been protecting. She's wanted back east. Murder. Poison. Stole $5,000. Real dangerous." "That's a lie," Jake said flatly. "Maybe so," Hawkins shrugged. "But there's a $1,000 reward, says otherwise. Dead or alive. And I got men who like money more than breathing." Jake's gut twisted. Not because he believed Hawkins, but because he believed Samuel would say anything to drag Clara back. "What's your play?" Jake asked. "Simple," Hawkins said. "Step aside. We take the lady, nobody gets shot." Quote, "You ain't taking her," Jake replied. Before Hawkins could answer, frantic footsteps rushed into the clearing. Clara, she'd run toward the gunfire, her face pale but determined. "Jake," she gasped, "I heard." Hawkins grinned. "There she is, the Black Widow herself." Clara stood behind Jake, her breath shaking but her chin high. "Whatever lies you've been told, they're false. No damage to the merchandise, Hawkins reminded his men. Morrison wants her alive. Jake shifted just enough to shield her. She's not going anywhere with you. Hawkins sighed. Then, I guess we do this the fun way. His hand dropped toward his gun. Jake moved. In one smooth motion, he grabbed Clara's arm and pushed her behind a cottonwood as the clearing exploded with gunfire. Bullets tore bark from trees. Jake's Colt roared back, dropping a rider from his horse. Another shot cracked past his cheek as he reloaded. "The horses!" Jake shouted. Clara didn't hesitate. She ran toward them, even as bullets screamed through the air. Jake covered her, firing again and again until his revolver clicked empty. Clara freed the horses just as Jake reached her. Together they mounted, hearts pounding, and kicked hard into the desert. Behind them, Hawkins's screams echoed like thunder. "Ride!" Jake yelled. They tore across dry ground, following game trails where horses could move fast and men couldn't follow easily. Wind whipped Clara's hair loose, dust burned their lungs, but they didn't stop, not once. Not until the sun sat high and their horses lathered with sweat. They reached an old box canyon by afternoon, quiet, hidden, surrounded by cliffs. Clara slid from her saddle, breathing hard. "Are we safe?" "For now," Jake said, checking the horizon, "but Hawkins isn't the only one coming." Clara closed her eyes, dread washing over her. "Samuel," she whispered. Jake holstered his gun and stepped close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "We'll face him," Jake said. "Together." Clara looked at him then, her fear mixing with something deeper. Trust, hope, maybe even more. But before she could speak, Jake pointed toward the distant trail, his eyes turning sharp. "Dust. Riders." "Clara," he said quietly. "They found us." And the real fight was about to begin. The riders grew closer, their silhouettes taking shape against the fading afternoon light. Jake counted at least 8 of them. Hawkins had returned, and this time he wasn't alone. Someone far worse rode in the middle of the pack. Clara's stomach twisted the moment she saw the man in the dark suit. Samuel Morrison, the man who'd chased her across half the country. The man who wanted to own her life, control her future, break her spirit. Jake felt her tremble beside him. He touched her elbow gently. "Stay behind me." "No," Clara whispered, her voice steady despite her fear. Not anymore. The canyon was narrow, boxed in by towering rock walls. A perfect trap, but Jake had chosen it for a reason. Here, numbers didn't matter. Here, one skilled shooter could hold back an army. "Get up on that ridge," Jake instructed, pointing toward a shelf of rock. "You'll see them coming. Take the rifle." Quote. "What about you?" Clara asked. Jake loaded his Colt and gave her a sharp, grim smile. "I'll handle the welcoming party." Clara nodded and climbed quickly. She settled behind a boulder, her hands gripping the Winchester Jake had given her. From here, she could see everything. The canyon mouth, the approaching riders, Jake standing like a lone sentinel in the open. Hawkins rode in first, his grin wide and cruel. "Sullivan," he shouted, "you're making this too hard. Just hand over the lady." Jake didn't move. "You want her? You come through me." Hawkins laughed. "Thought you might say that." Samuel Morrison stepped forward then. His fine black coat looked absurd in the dust and heat. But he held himself like royalty, like someone who believed the world owed him obedience. "Clara," Samuel called, scanning the cliffs. "Come down and surrender. This chase can end. Your life can return to order." Clara's voice rang out across the canyon. "You want order? Go back east. There's no order out here, only truth." Samuel sneered. "You murdered my brother." Quote. "Thomas died because he drank too much and raced his carriage into a post." Clara snapped. "I buried him. You tried to bury me." Hawkins signaled his men. "Enough talking. Take him." Jake moved before the echo of Hawkins' voice faded. His first shot dropped the rider closest to him. Clara fired a split second later, taking down another from her position above. The canyon exploded with gunfire. Horses reared. Men shouted. Bullets sparked off the stone walls. Jake rolled behind a slab of rock, firing carefully, methodically. His movements were crisp, controlled, like a man who had spent half his life surviving impossible odds. Clara followed his every instruction in her head. Breathe, aim, squeeze, not pull. Another man fell. But the enemy was too many, and they were closing in. "Jake!" Clara shouted, as she saw one rider circle behind him. Jake turned just in time. His colt barked once, the rider dropping lifelessly to the dirt. But the distraction cost him. A bullet grazed Jake's shoulder, spinning him around. He stumbled, dropping to one knee, pain flaring hot through his chest. "Jake!" Clara's scream tore through the canyon. He looked up at her, blood soaking through his shirt. "I'm fine," he yelled, though his face had paled. He wasn't fine, and Hawkins saw it. Hawkins charged forward, his massive weight hitting Jake like a hammer. They crashed into the dirt, rolling near the cliff wall. Hawkins swung wildly, knife flashing in his hand. "You should have stayed out of this!" Hawkins roared. Jake blocked the blade with his forearm, gritting his teeth as it cut through skin. He punched Hawkins hard, but the big man hardly felt it. His strength was fueled by rage and greed. Clara scrambled down the rocks, dropping the rifle as she reached the ground. She ran toward them, heart thundering. Jake saw her coming. "Clara, stay back!" But Hawkins saw her too. He shoved Jake aside and lunged for her. Clara drew the small knife Jake had taught her to use. Hawkins grabbed her arm, laughing. "That little thing ain't scarin' no one." Clara didn't aim for strength. She aimed for precision. She drove the blade upward, beneath his ribs, exactly where Jake had taught her. Hawkins froze, eyes wide with disbelief. "You!" he gasped. Clara's voice was steady. "This is for every woman you've hurt." Hawkins stumbled, fell, and didn't rise again. Clara dropped the bloody knife, her breath shaking as the world seemed to tilt. Then Jake's arms were around her, pulling her close, even as blood seeped down his chest. "You did good," he whispered, but the danger wasn't over. A click echoed in the silence. Samuel Morrison aimed a gleaming pearl-handled revolver at them, his hand trembling with fury. "You ruined everything," Samuel hissed. "She was mine. She belonged to me." Jake shoved Clara behind him, though he could barely stand. "Let her go," Jake growled. Samuel's finger tightened on the trigger. A shot rang out. Samuel staggered, eyes wide, staring at the bloom of red spreading across his vest. He collapsed in the dirt, his fancy revolver slipping from his fingers. Behind him, a figure emerged from the shadows of the canyon. Tom Garrett, Jake's oldest friend. A ranger, a man who never walked away from justice. "Sorry I'm late," Tom said, lowering his rifle. "Had to pick off the last of the riders creeping up the ridge." Clara sagged into Jake, tears burning her eyes. Relief washed through her so strong it hurt. Tom approached, checking Samuel's body. Dead, like he deserved. Jake swayed, blood loss catching up. Clara grabbed him, holding him steady. "Sit down, you're hurt." "I'll live," Jake muttered, even as his knees gave out. Clara knelt beside him, pressing cloth to his wound. "You're not dying on me, not after everything." Tom crouched beside them. "He won't. I'll get a doctor. And when he's healed, both of you are coming with me to give your statements." Clara nodded. "We'll tell the truth." Tom smiled gently. "The truth is enough to clear your name." Jake gripped Clara's hand weakly. "It's over." She leaned close, tears falling onto his cheek. "Yes, it's over." But Jake shook his head, voice barely a whisper. "No. Clara, it's just beginning." They left the canyon together, Clara supporting Jake, Tom watching their backs. What waited ahead was freedom, a real future, a chance at life without running, a life they would build side by side. The nightmare was finished, and their love story had only just begun.